Hey, what's going on, guys? Today we're talking about how to beat Floowandereeze. And there's two reasons why I'm doing this. One, I have noticed that I do get a good amount of responses from the How to Beat series. I think it even goes as far back as like what to side against DDD. I think that was my first video like this, and they all have relatively solid views. So I want to do more videos like this. So if there are any decks that you want to know, I always just pick meta-based decks, but I do know how to counter a good amount of decks. So if there's a deck that at your locals or that you lost to at your regionals or what have you, but you just can't seem to beat, let me know in those comments down below, and I'll let you know how to beat that deck. Now, I will say if it's the Adventurer, Cybers, Brave, DPE, Eldritch, 60 card shenanigans deck, I have absolutely no idea because that thing is just bah. But when it comes down to Floowandereeze, that's obviously a joke. But if it comes down to Floowandereeze, this archetype, it can be tricky. And the main reason for that is because this is like it's like a Crystron archetype, or it's like a Dark Magician archetype, in the sense that it functions differently than the way other archetypes function. So most archetypes are like summon, summon, create, negate, summon, 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 set maybe one, and on a hand trap, two omni negations, or two forms of negation and a form of disruption in the back row. That's usually the ending boards that you're going to see. Floowandereeze doesn't do that. Floowandereeze is going to end on like an M pen, maybe a hand trap, but they're really trying to, and that's the biggest thing, right? What is this deck trying to do? They're really trying to either one, floodgate you out and just make you just not want to play the game anymore, or two, hopefully, they're trying to rise you over and over and over again. And the reason why I say hopefully, obviously you don't want to get rised over and over again, is because at least when you're getting rised over and over again, it's a fun interaction. These are all winged beasts, and I believe, don't quote me on this, I believe they're all wind, right? Um, so the fact remains that this archetype can run Rivalry of the Warlords. This archetype can run Gozen Match, and any archetype that can run those two cards are going to be problems. So they're actually water and wind. Um, but if you drop this, if you have M Pen already on board, you could probably play Rivalry and Gozen Match and be stuck under wind, and that's fine. Um, there's other floodgates too. Non-fusion area is a fun little floodgate. Can't really run skill train. It can really run anti-spell. Um, it can't run there can only be one, which is something to keep in mind. If you're talking about siding against this card, all of a sudden, now, wait, we can floodgate you guys. You can't have more than one wing beast on the board. That completely shuts the deck down, right? Um, Also, where my mouse is a big deal too. Dimension Shifter is a very powerful card. There's some archetypes that are just running this card and it's not good for them to run this card. Floowandereeze is not one of those archetypes. Like Floowandereeze runs D Shifter the best, and it's a main reason why why the deck is so good, and why the card is so expensive. Um, when it comes to playing through D Shifter, I had to pause for a second because it's not easy. When it comes to playing through D Shifter, you just have to weigh your trade offs, right? So the trade off of if I, just black my entire hand on the field, there's going to be a lot of cards that I probably want in my graveyard that are going to be banished. So maybe I should do almost like playing under Maxi, or kind of trying to dodge Nibiru, saving resources so when D Shifter is no longer in effect, I can play this card. Because the cool thing about D Shifter, it's kind of hard to activate more than once a duel. So if you're able to get through this card and keep playing, you're going to be in a great spot. Now, DD Crow is another issue. DD Crow is searchable, um, and it's one of the best cards in the format right now. And I think the interaction with this archetype in DD Crow is probably why this archetype is still lingering, because it is such a good card right now, because it does counter the branded package. I believe it counters DPE as well. If the DPE dies because of the Fusion Destiny effect. If it, or no, something, I can't remember what kills it. Either Fusion Destiny or Anaconda kills it. I think they both might. No, Fusion Destiny does it. Anyway, if the DPE dies, it doesn't matter, because if the DPE dies, however it died, it's coming back in the next standby phase. But it doesn't technically say that the card special summons itself. It technically special summons a Destiny Hero card from the graveyard, right? So if you DD Crow that, just keep that in mind, right? That a Celestial could still come out. But if they already banished Celestial and they're trying to use DPE, you DD Crow it, it's gone, right? And that's something to keep in mind if you are playing DPE against this archetype, is that they probably do have the DD Crow. Because like I said, this archetype has a searchable way. I'm trying to remember the exact name of it. That's why I'm looking down at my phone here. Yeah, we have Robina, right? They have a searchable way to search for DD Crow. It's very dangerous, very lethal, a fantastic card. Um, does interact poorly with Dimension Shifter, though, and that's something to keep in mind as well. And now a big issue, a big problem with this deck, and it's unfortunate because when we try to face it, we can't really control this. This deck does have a tendency to get in its own way. And when Monarchs first came out, when Frog Arcs were first a deck, those were like the closest I've ever seen. True Draco, actually, is probably the closest I've ever seen to a situation where a an archetype around tribute summoning didn't have issues with getting fodder and getting cards to tribute said fodder, right? And Floowandereeze is designed super duper well. It is. That's why they all search. That's why literally every single one of them search, so it can have fodder and it can have monsters to summon, right? But it still breaks. There's still a lot of like, okay, a couple of hand traps, a field spell that isn't live, and a couple of tribute summonable monsters. That's not good, right? So keep that in mind, that if you drop the Infinite Impermanence or the Effect Veiler, which are insane against this card, right? I believe Effect Veiler says discard and you cannot activate, or discards to the graveyard or sends to the graveyard. I don't believe you can activate Effect Veiler under Dimension. I'm just gonna keep just looking stuff up on my phone, because that's just an interaction that thinks, yeah, you do have to send Effect Veiler to the graveyard, but you don't have to do that with Infinite Permanence. Infinite Permanence, you can just activate it, right? So my opponent summons that Rabina, they're going to search for another Floowandereeze, or they're going to go search for DD Crow. I drop Imperm, skadoosh, right? Now, if they play Book of Moon, or if they play a way to play around the Infinite Impermanence, you might just be SOL, but really it's a resource game. When you're playing a deck like this, you're not, it's a different style. Okay, this deck wants you to, like I just said, blah, your entire board out. This deck wants you to just swing for the fences and come at it as hard as you can. And some cases, if you're playing the right deck, like that kitchen sink deck, Eldritch Cybers, Adventurer, DPE, Artifact, Magician Souls. There's so much stuff in that archetype. If you're playing one of those decks and you open perfectly against this deck that kind of bricked, you probably can just 2-0 sweep it effortlessly, right? But if you're in a situation where maybe you didn't open super well and the Floowandereeze player opens pretty well, like M-Pen and a Floodgate, which is kind of all they need, and they have a Rise in hand, it's not the worst thing to sort of play at this archetype speed, right? But when you're playing at a deck like this, when you're playing at a stun deck speed, it's all about resources, card advantage. So what card advantage is the amount of cards you have on your board and in your hand versus how many cards your opponent has on their board or in their hand. So if I have 3 cards on board and 2 cards in my hand, I have 5 cards. If my opponent has 2 cards on board, 2 cards in hand, they have 4 cards, I have card advantage. I have 1 more card than my opponent. Now keep this in mind, and M-Pen's a great example of this. If their 2 cards is M-Pen and Anti-Spell, and my 2 cards are Beaver Warrior, Jerry Beansman, and 3 Raigekis, I'm not in a fantastic spot, right? So it's just all about managing resources against this archetype. It's really not 100% about. I mean, obviously you can Ghost Ogre the field spell, and obviously you can, Ash. Ash is a really solid card against this archetype, as it is against everything, right? Nibiru can be as well, but it doesn't usually get to that 5th summon. Um, but theoretically, I guess theoretically Nibiru should be good against this deck, but it's not. Uh, and this card was kind of designed to counter link monsters, because if you notice, what it says is that when it's in a monster zone, your opponent cannot activate effects of special summon monsters they control in attack position. So you have to summon out link monsters in attack position, but you don't have to summon out Xyz monsters in attack position. You don't, like a Castell outs this card, the Sky Blaster Musketeer. A Scrap Dragon outs this card, right? So trying to think of a more recent example there, a DPE outs this card. Uh, the Sword Soul level 8 monster outs this card. A Baron de Fleur outs this card. Guardian Chimera outs this card. What's the other one? The Ice Jade. Ice Mirror Jade outs this card. But they have to be in defense position. You do not out this card in attack position, right? And that could be a big misplay. That could be a big misplay where it's like, if you're playing. Now, obviously, if you're playing like Master Duel, and this deck, if this deck comes to Master Duel, which is also why I'm doing this right now, it's the best, definitely chance that this archetype could come to Master Duel. Pac sent out a tweet about it, so that's what gave me the idea. But if you're playing like at locals, where usually you're playing against this deck, or on Dueling Book, and you're doing your combos, you're trying to play around M-Pen, and that's really all they have is an M-Pen and a couple of hand traps. You play through the hand traps, you summon out DPE in attack position, and you do a couple of other things. You activate Toon Worlds, you activate Toon Table of Contents, searching Toon Kingdom, you activate Toon Kingdom, you go to Battle Phase, and you try to pop with DPE, and they go M-Pen isn't going to negate that because it's in attack position. You can't just switch it to defense position and go like, well, it's in defense position now. Like, no, right? You're already past that spawn. But the way that works is, if the last thing that you did was summon DPE, you can go like, wait a minute, let me switch this to defense position, right? And sometimes Floowandereeze players, they'll let you know. Because players like this, they like messing with you. So they'll go, you can't activate its effects as an attack position. Sometimes they'll do that, right? And you can make your opponent pay for doing that. If they go like, you can't activate their effect as an attack position, I was like, okay, switch to defense effect. Like, oh, I forgot that was a thing. I forgot it only says attack position monsters. Because it could very easily say your opponent cannot activate the effects of special summon monsters. Right? But it's specifically designed to counter link monsters. It's not specifically designed to counter special summon monsters. The Ryza is scary. The Mist Valley Apex Avion is scary. If they do drop the Ryza, though, like I said, it's just all card advantage. And this deck is not going to kill you in 3 turns, probably. Like, maybe it can. If you're a Floowandereeze player and you've killed somebody in 3 turns, let me know. Or you OTK'd a person. Like, I don't even know if it's possible to OTK with this deck. Right? They don't summon from the extra deck. Pot of Duality is a great card. Pot of Extravagance is a great card. Which means, though, Troll and Lockbird. It's another fantastic card. So there are some interesting choke points with this. A lot of times this deck creates its own choke points. But if you can't find the choke points, if you don't draw the hand traps, you don't draw the counters, you don't draw the outs, you don't draw the Droll, the Imperms, the Ashes, right? If you don't draw the Zombie Worlds, that's why Zombie World 2, every time there's a Tribute Summon based deck, Zombie World randomly shows up. Because I believe Zombie World... Yeah, because Zombie World says that this deck can't play. And Zombie World... And it was cool, too, about Zombie World. Is Zombie World super searchable. Because you send the Necroworld Banshee off of Branded Fusion. You banish the card. And you just go search Zombie World. I believe that's how that interaction works. I believe Necroworld Banshee... I know Necroworld Banshee is the way that you get to Zombie World. So it's either when it hits the graveyard or it's when it's banished. And like I said, I could look it up, but I've already looked up a bunch of things, so I'm not doing that. The point that I'm trying to make, if you don't draw the Zombie Roll, if you don't draw the Ash, you don't draw the Harpy's Feather Duster, right? Twin Twisters, Red Reboot, Lightning Storms, right? Anti-back row cards. Play those cards and, side in those cards against this deck. Because even if they don't see their Floodgates, they do still have continuous spells and traps as well as field spells that they like to play. So even if they don't see the anti-spells or the rivalries or the Gozen matches, there's still going to, you're still going to get value out of a Harpy's Feather Duster, right? So if you don't see those, though, resource game. Resource game, resource game, resource game. I know you have an M-Pen on board. I'm playing Salamangreat. I have... Actually, you can easily out that with Salamangreat. But I'm playing Salamangreat, or I'm playing, Code Talker. I'm playing a Link Summoning base. I'm playing Gokis. I'm playing a Link Summoning base deck. Resources, resources, resources. Right? And just slowly but surely wither your opponent down and get it to a game state where it's their top decking. They have 2 cards on the field. You're top decking, but you have 3 cards on the field. Right? So slow the game down. If you're slowing the game down at their speed, make sure you're heading card advantage, right? That's the biggest thing. If they don't brick and you don't draw the outs, you can still beat this deck, right? And that's really why this deck is not tier 1, right? If this deck was maybe a little bit better, you definitely could see it being kind of tricky if it doesn't brick and you don't draw the counters to it, but you can still beat this deck. You can definitely still beat this deck if they open well and you don't. But let me know what you guys think. What are the ways that you guys have found to beat Floowandereeze? Also, how do you say it? Is it Floowandereeze? 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 Because it's spelled Floowandereeze. But no one pronounces it Floowandereeze. Let me know in those comments down below. Make sure you guys click that like button to show your support for the channel. Subscribe for even more content. But most importantly of all, have a good day.